situation I find myself in at the moment isn't the most pleasant one. I can't even call it interesting since it's the exact opposite of that. Are you wondering about the situation I'm in right now? You honestly shouldn't, there's no point in wasting your brain cells. At the moment I'm sitting in a car. But wait, what's so boring about that? Oh yeah, the fact that I've been in this piece of moving metal for over an hour. So now that we've got that out of the way, let me introduce myself. My name is Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto, heir to the Uzu-Kase Corporation. Now you may be wondering why we cut down the name. Well, Ka-san and Tu-san decided that they needed to shorten the name when they chose to fuse the two corporations. Smart decision if I do say so myself. If you're wondering about my appearance, then you should know that I inherited my Tu-san's spiky blonde hair and his blue eyes. I inherited Ka-san's face shape and her personality. She says it's in my Uzumaki blood. I also have 3 whisker marks on each of my cheeks. Doctors said they were birthmarks. At the moment I'm wearing a black t-shirt. Over said t-shirt is an open dark blue jacket with orange stripes down the sides. I also wore a pair of black jeans and white and blue sneakers. You'd think a rich kid like me would be wearing some form of high-quality clothes, but I prefer to look more casual than serious. Well, that's enough about me, so let's begin talking about the man next to me, my Tu-san Minato Namikaze. I won't bother you with many of the details. Just think of an older version of me without the whiskers and more mature and professional. Okay, so back to the story. One of Dad's friends had decided to come visit us for a while. He apparently had something very urgent to speak to Tu-san about. He had decided to fly out from all the way from the US to come and see us. The guy had some business to attend to over there, but the importance of the matter he needed to speak to Tu-san about was too high. He decided to take the first plane back to Japan. Only problem was that the plane would arrive in an airport around 3 miles away from where we lived. Tu-san chose to welcome his old friend by going to personally pick them up. But the weird thing is that he decided to drag me with him, which is so unlike him. I questioned him over this decision and he only answered with the typical, "It'll make sense later," phrase. So I was practically forced into the car and taken hostage by my own parent. Well, it's not all bad. I still had my music for the ride and a phone to keep me distracted. Let's just take a small cut and return when we reach the airport. 2 hours later, well, that was absolutely terrible. Even music couldn't save me from the incredible boredom I felt at the moment. The only thing that kept me from dying of said boredom was my incredible imagination. I don't know about you guys, but a car ride and some music makes my imagination run wild. Too bad all I could think of was what happened back then. No, it's better if I simply forget those memories, they only hurt me. Besides, my life's changed, I've changed. I bet you're wondering what I imagined during the car ride, but I won't give you the satisfaction of knowing. It's better kept unsaid and buried by time. It seems we had finally arrived at the airport and now it was time to meet Father's friend. We stepped out of the vehicle after parking it and made our way inside the airport. It wasn't long before a smile reached my father's face and a man in a business suit walked towards us. Behind him was a young woman around my age with black hair that looked like silk, ice-cold blue eyes and a face that belonged to an angel. She wore a simple and modest yellow sundress that showed off her amazing figure. If I wasn't the man I am today, I would be blushing and stuttering right about now. But that simply wasn't the case. Oh wait, I totally forgot to inform you that Dad's friend was actually being accompanied by his daughter. Satoru-kun, it's so nice to see you again after all these years, spoke Dad with a huge grin on his face as he shook the other man's hand. So this was the famous man known as Yukinoshita Satoru. He was everything you could imagine from a businessman, except he seemed much more open and friendly, just like Tu-san. It's good to see you as well, Minato-kun. Let me introduce you to my daughter Yukinoshita Yukino. Satoru spoke while also grabbing his daughter's shoulders and holding her in front of him. It's nice to meet you, Namikaze-san, spoke Yukino. She acted like a proper lady with the highest level of manners, as expected from the daughter of such a well-known and wealthy person. Tu-san smiled at the young lady and shook her hand. It is very nice to meet you as well, Yukinoshita-san. He turned towards me and took me by the shoulders just like Satoru had done with Yukino. This is my son Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. I hope you to get along well. You probably think I would bow to her or at least shake her hand. But I simply stood there and gave her a simple greeting. Yo, it's nice to meet you, I guess. Out of the corner of my eye I spotted the slight twitch in Tu-san's eyes and couldn't help but smirk. I also noticed Satoru trying his best to hold in his laughter. But the weirdest reaction was Yukino's. She simply raised an eyebrow and stared at me. Wow, Minato, you truly weren't kidding when you told me Naruto had changed a lot, spoke Satoru with a smirk on his face as he looked at Tu-san. The words he used made me realize that this man had met me before, but I couldn't recall ever meeting him. Excuse me, Yukinoshita-san, but have we ever met before? I asked. This truly had me curious since I could truly not recall meeting him. Oh, you must have forgotten since you were so small, but my family used to visit yours when you were a child, he answered. You and Yukino used to play together back then. You used to be so full of energy back then. I looked away and answered him, well, people change, it has been many years. I could see a small frown form on both the Yukinoshita's faces as I spoke those words. It was almost like it saddened them when they came out of my mouth. I could tell Tu-san noticed the tension since he immediately tried to break it. Well, let's not just stand here and head home, he said, trying to lower the tension. He slowly walked over to their luggage and picked one up. Naruto, be a gentleman and help Yukino-chan with her bags. I grudgingly followed his orders and walked over to where Yukino was standing. It seemed she hadn't brought as much luggage as her father, who had decided that 2 large bags simply weren't enough. I ended up having to carry only 2 medium-sized bags back to the care, unlike Tusan and Satoru, which both had to carry the large bags. I walked alongside Yukino as we walked over to the car. It was then that I noticed a problem. You see, Tusan loves flashy cars. Sure, our family is very humble, but Tusan is known for loving to drive the fastest of cars. And today he had decided to drive his Aston Martin for the trip. No matter how hard we tried and how hard we shoved, we weren't able to fit all of the bags in the trunk. For one of the fastest cars that can be bought for less than $1 million, it had a very decent amount of trunk space. But for this situation, there was almost none. For fuck's sake, Tusan, this is why you need to get rid of this addiction. I exploded. I love fast and flashy cars myself, but this is ridiculous. I think your son is right, Minato-kun. This addiction of yours is getting out of hand, agreed Satoru. Yukino stood to the side and tried to contain her goggles with one hand. She must be amused by the way we scolded the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. Tusan could only stand there and take his scolding before his face brightened up. He must have gotten an idea. Wait a minute. I always hate his ideas. A playful smirk appeared on his face as he began to explain his plan. Let's just put the bags that won't fit in one of the back seats. I gave him a confused look and questioned him on the big issue with this problem. Tusan, there's only 4 seats in the car. If we use one for the bags, then where is the 4th person going to go? Something seemed fishy about this whole situation. Yukino also seemed puzzled but decided to wait for Tusan's answer while Satoru had a glint in his eye. Wait, that glint is identical to Tusan's. Oh, this can't be good. Well, son, Satoru and I shall take the front seats while you and Yukino-chan will take the remaining seat, he explained way too enthusiastically for my tastes. It was at that moment that I realized Tusan's true motives. He planned all of this just to try and help me with my problem. He is a genius after all. He would never make such a careless mistake. I turned to glare at him with all I had and began to notice sweat pouring from his neck. He knew he had crossed the line just with the look I had given him. So what, am I supposed to let her sit on my lap for the entire trip? It seems he wasn't backing down from this, since he answered calmly, that's the only option we have, son. Unless you're willing to wait 6 hours for us to return. So I had 2 options now. I could either let Yukino sit on my lap for around 3 hours, or I could wait 6 hours at the airport for Tusan to return for me. I took all the details into consideration before my decision, mostly the pros and cons. The first option meant getting home much faster but end up with me in a very awkward situation for 3 hours. And let's not forget Tusan would consider it a win for him. My second option would mean getting home in twice the time, but it would teach Tusan never to cross this line again. My desire to reach home was very strong, but I needed Tusan to understand that he couldn't do this anymore, so I took the second option. I'll stay here then, just call me when you get back. And with those words I turned my back on them and began walking back inside the airport. But before I could reach the entrance, a set of words reached my ears that made me turn back. In hindsight, that was most likely an unwise decision. Do you find me so repulsive that you do not wish to be so close to me? Yukino asked. The moment I met her eyes, I knew I was finished. She was giving me the strongest attack all females possessed by only few had truly mastered it. A technique that not even the strongest of manga or anime characters could survive. The legendary puppy dog eyes technique. After seeing said eyes, I immediately wanted to deny her claims. But I kept myself as composed as could have before taking a few steps closer to her. Of course, I do not find you repulsive. In fact, I can say you are one of the most beautiful females I've ever met. I simply believed you would not be okay with this idea. Of course, that last sentence was a lie. I simply wanted out of this whole plan. Her entire demeanor changed from depressed to happy and flustered. Thank you very much for the compliment, she responded with a smile. So it's settled then, you two will sit on the same seat, Tusan declared. I turned to see him giving me a triumphant smirk. Damn him, so this was your ace in the hole? Well, it's about time I showed him mine. I couldn't hold my own smirk as I said my next set of words. Tusan, even if I agreed, this whole idea is illegal. Checkmate, Tusan. This entire plan crumbles, no. Well, that's why I brought one of my custom cars, he said as he took out his car keys and clicked a button. The backseat windows were covered by steel that blended in with the rest of the car. And then a barrier began to appear right behind the front seats. You see, an Aston Martin can be either a 4-seater or a 2-seater, and with this new transformation it looked like a 2-seater and his the back seats. I looked on with wide eyes as I realized that Tusan had truly thought of everything. It seemed I still had a long way to go before I could truly outsmart him. Let's get this show on the road then, he exclaimed with a giddy smile. He helped Satoru pick up the bag and positioned it on one of the back seats. I, on the other hand, had no choice but to walk over to the other side of the car and open the door. I sat down and looked at Yukino, who was standing outside the door. I took a deep breath before addressing her. Well, aren't you gonna get on? She blushed at my question and simply nodded before positioning herself on top of my lap. I already detested this whole situation. I saw Tusan stop at the open door. He smiled at us and gave me the news that would multiply the awkwardness of this whole situation by 10. Well, I hope you two can get along well. You are engaged after all. And with that he closed the door, not even bothering with my response. Those words just kept repeating in my head. My eyes were wide in shock and my jaw had dropped so low that it felt like it had dislocated. So this was the reason behind this trip. This was why he had taken every precautionary measure to make sure I ended up in this situation. I wouldn't be surprised if the bag next to us or one of the others was filled with rocks. And there I sat, motionless and trapped in my own mind thanks to the words "2-san," with my fiancé in my arms. "Naruto-kun, can you hear me?" Yukino asked. Of course I can hear you, but my mind is already having problems processing 2-san's words. Her face came into view and all I could see was the worry in her eyes. "Come on, Naruto. You can't freeze up like this, especially in front of her, your own fiancé." I'm fine," I answered her. It seemed to have calmed her down, but not completely. That didn't matter to me at the moment. I needed her to answer a question of mine. "Yukino-san, were you informed of this arrangement?" She couldn't hold her face with mine and looked away, so she did know. "I was," she answered. "Namikaze-san and 2-san made this arrangement when we were children since we got along so well." She explained. "So this was decided even before that day. But it seems that you have forgotten all the memories we shared." She had then looked at me straight in the eyes with tears streaming down her cheeks. "But the contract also states that if one of us doesn't agree to the contract, then we may call it off. So if you truly wish not to marry me, then you may decline." I could tell that simply saying those words pained her tremendously. Seeing her in that state brought up memories of the past, memories long forgotten by my mind. I remember befriending her when because she was lonely, and then later spending my days with her on the swings or running around the garden. And now here we were, a decade later, engaged. But I couldn't do that to her. I wasn't the same cheerful kid I was back then. My heart was rotten and cold, but even I wasn't cruel enough to bring someone down with me. "Look, Yukino, by the way you reacted to just saying those words, I can guess that you have feelings for me," I answered. "But I'm not the same child I used to be." After hearing my words, she gained a determined look in her eyes. Her tears had stopped and now she stared at me straight in the eyes. "I understand that you have had a tough time since our last meeting." Those words made me widen my eyes. Surely 2-san wouldn't betray my trust like that. "Your father has explained to me everything that has occurred to you at Konoha Academy. But that only makes me want to help you even more. I want the kind and caring boy I once knew to return." She seemed very passionate about this, but the boy she knew is dead. I had to make that clear. But those weren't the words that left my mouth. "There's no telling whether or not you'll be able to change me back. Then I'll stay with you forever if I have to." She spoke those words with the sincerest of smiles that I couldn't help but return. Maybe I'll give her a chance. She slowly laid her head on my chest as I slowly relaxed. It then dawned on me that she had no seatbelt, so I wrapped my arms around her waist. She seemed flustered at my actions, so I explained myself. "Don't get any ideas. You don't have a seatbelt, so this is the least I could do." She simply snuggled closer to my chest and replied, "Can't you let a girl dream? After all, we will be going to the same school from now on." Of course, 2-san had thought of everything. "So you're being instated into Kuo Academy then?" I asked. She didn't answer because she had already fallen asleep, and it wasn't long before I myself also left to the land of dreams. The door to the Aston Martin had opened after 3 hours of long driving. Minato stood outside of the car looking in at what he believed to be a lovely scene. "You're one step closer to happiness, son." This whole plan that he had decided to create was all for Naruto, whether he accepted it or not. His son had grown cold and distant after what had happened a year ago. What truly worried him is that he never saw him cry after that day. It was like all the positive emotions his son could once radiate were now caged and locked away in the deepest part of his heart. Kushina and him had been worried about him since his whole demeanor changed. No longer was he the happy-go-lucky child they had once known. They were afraid that he would stay that way and never find happiness. "Would you look at that? It seems your plan is already bearing fruit, Minato," said Satoru. He was standing behind him with a hand on his shoulder, looking into the backseat with a small smile. The moment he heard Minato's plan to help young Naruto, he was fully on board. The crush his daughter had for him also helped in his decision. And now seeing them in each other's arms like that only made him happy. "Do you think we should wake them up or leave them like that?" Minato asked. Satoru pondered his question for some time before giving him his opinion. "I think the best course of action would be to wake them up. You're already on terrible terms with him as it is." Minato frowned after hearing his friend. He knew that doing this to Naruto without his consent would piss him off. And with his current state, that would only make the consequences worse. The old Naruto would be much easier to deal with in a pissed-off state. He would throw a temper tantrum or simply beat the shit out of you. But this Naruto was much different. He would shut you out if you ever pissed him off. He'd make you feel like your existence meant nothing to him. And that was after a year since the accident. Minato slowly reached into the car and shook their shoulders. The two teens began to wake and rub the sleepiness out of their eyes. Once they became fully aware of the position they were in and the audience they had, they blushed. Naruto glanced at Yukino and silently told her to get off of him. Yukino reluctantly complied and got out of the car, and Naruto followed shortly afterward. Naruto began walking towards the door of their mansion without even glancing at his father. Yukino raised an eyebrow at his action and caught up to him. "Don't you think we should help them with the bags?" she asked. Naruto smirked. "No, that's the least they get for making sit in that uncomfortable position for 3 hours." He spoke those words loud enough for Minato to hear. "So he's already beginning to give me the cold shoulder," thought Minato. If only Minato knew what was to come later that night. As soon as Naruto opened the door, a red blue tackled him to the ground. He could only lay there annoyed as he was already expecting this greeting from his mother. "Ka-chan, please get off of me." Kushina stood up and helped her son stand before noticing the young woman next to her son. Naruto, who is this? Naruto almost couldn't contain his smirk as he told Kushina who the girl next to him was. Well, Ka-chan. This is Yukinoshita Yukino, and according to Tu-san, my fiancé. Kushina didn't react at his words, but he knew it was only a matter of time before she swooshed. A trail of dust could be seen left behind by an angry Kushina as she made her way towards her husband. He chucked once he began to hear Minato's cries from outside. Yukino only stood there with a worried look, believing this meant her future mother-in-law wouldn't accept her. She was also slightly put off by the evil smirk Naruto had plastered on his face. Well, make yourself at home. I'll give you a tour after my shower, and with that said Naruto walked off toward his room, which was on the second floor. He opened the door and took a look around. He remembered how lively his room used to be, full of pictures and posters. Most of those pictures had her in it, so he had decided to throw them away. He headed towards the bathroom and began taking his shower. He always took cold showers so he would have something to think about other than her, the cold. That's how it had been for a year now. Hot showers made him think and imagine while cold showers made him numb. But for some reason, even the cold couldn't stop his mind from remembering that day. And so he stood there, not allowing the tears to spill, and took a trip through his memories. Flashback. 1 year ago, Naruto couldn't have asked for a more perfect day. Not only was it a Friday, which meant he would have a break from school tomorrow, but he had made plans to spend most of his free time with his girlfriend. Thinking about said girl brought a smile to his face. She was perfect. He loved her navy blue hair and her lavender eyes. That's right, people. Naruto was dating none other than the Hyuga heiress herself, Hyuga Hinata. Their relationship had made him the happiest man in the world, well, technically teenager, but who cared about the details. He was making his way to school like normal, by walking. He had decided early on in his life that he wouldn't act like all the other rich kids. He didn't want the privileges that came with being rich, such as a car ride to school. He much more preferred walking there and enjoying the outside world. As he made his way to school, he could see that there was a lot of commotion. There was a black limo parked right outside the school, and he could see some of the other students whispering behind his back. He shut out the whispers and made his way into school. The first thing on his to-do list was to go meet Hinata. As he made his way towards their usual meeting spot, he spotted a man standing there. He recognized the man as none other than Hyuga Hiyashi. Simply by the look on the man's face, Naruto knew him being here couldn't be good. Was Hinata injured or sick? Sadly, he did not know that his imagination was nothing compared to reality. Hiyashi had spotted the boy that had brought happiness to his elder daughter's heart and made his way towards him. He had to be the one to tell the child about the disaster that had occurred that same morning. He stood in front of Naruto and prepared to deliver the worst news of his life. Naruto, getting worried, asked, Hiyashi-san, where's Hinata? Has she gotten sick today? Simply hearing his words almost made him crack, but he had to push through. Hinata would have wanted it that way. Naruto-kun, I'm afraid Hinata won't be coming back, ever. Naruto was confused by the man's words. Why would Hinata never return to school? Did she plan to move somewhere else? But that couldn't be right since her father was standing in front of him. Why won't Hinata be returning? A lone tear escaped Hiyashi's eye as he finally broke the news to the teen. Hinata was on her way to school when a drunk driver swerved out of the street and crashed into her. The doctors said she was killed instantly. Flashback end. And that was the moment Naruto's heart cracked. He was never the same after that day, after those words were spoken. His parents had heard the news and came to pick him up early from school. But it was then that their worry had skyrocketed. They didn't even see a tear from their child's eye. And the spark that they once held was nowhere to be seen. It was as if all emotion had left him. He didn't cry when he heard the news. He didn't cry when he saw her body at the funeral. He didn't cry when they began to bury her. The damage had already been done. It was as if his emotions had left with her, the love of his life. At least that's what everyone believed to be true. But they were all wrong. Naruto had shed a tear that day, a tear of blood exactly like the one that was running down his cheeks as he closed his eyes. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror as he snapped them open and stared at their reflection. He saw the red eyes with 6 sides extending out from the pupil. These were the eyes that he had gained that day. He rarely brought them out to light since they would give him a headache and make his eyes bleed. But the memories of that day would make them appear anyway. Naruto sighed after he failed to deactivate his mangekyo sharingan. He dressed in a blue t-shirt and some black cargo shorts before exiting the bathroom. He made his way over to his drawer and stared at the necklace that sat there. It wasn't anything too extravagant. The piece of jewelry was a simple circular blue gem attached to a metal chain. It had been a gift from his uncle Kuritsugu Emiya. He had told him to never lose it because it would become important much later on in life. He held it in his hand and continued to analyze it closely. He had tried to find the reason of its importance over the years, but he had never figured it out. His eye began to burn and a drop of blood rolled down his cheek. He brought the hand that had been holding the gem up to wipe the blood from his cheek. This had caused the gem to fall to the ground and cause a soft thump as it landed. Naruto squatted down and picked it up with the bloodied hand. The moment his hand made contact, the gem began to glow. It wasn't long before the whole room was engulfed in an explosion. Downstairs, I can't believe you, Minato-kun. How can you not inform me of the plan you have for our son? Asked an exasperated Kushina. Her husband had explained the details of his plan to help Naruto recover, and she couldn't help but be pissed. Minato simply scratched the back of his head with a sheepish expression on his face. He also had a couple new bruises on his face. Pissing off his wife was not a smart decision, ever. Satoru and Yukino simply stood off to the side, barely holding in their laughter at the way the two acted. But the light-hearted discussion was disrupted by the opening of the living room doors. The room's occupants turned to find none other than Emiya Kuritsugu standing at the entrance. "Kuritsugu, what brings you here?" asked a now very serious Minato. After all, he hadn't heard from his brother in years ever since he left on his long-term mission. He hadn't been informed of the details but knew that it must have been extremely important. Kuritsugu turned to look at his brother. "Minato, I have bad news. The Holy Grail War is beginning once more, and I'm afraid that..." He was suddenly cut off as an explosion shook the mansion. They all ran out of the living room and saw that the explosion had come from upstairs. They rushed to see what all the commotion was about but froze. The door to Naruto's room had been blasted open and all they could see was smoke. Kushina, worried about her son, rushed inside to see if he was injured. She was shortly followed by the others and they all waited for the smoke to disperse. Once they gained visibility inside the room, they took in the surroundings. Naruto was on his ass, completely unharmed as far as they could see. But he was staring at something, or better yet, someone. They turned to see at what he was staring at and saw 3 individuals. There stood 3 women. One with short blonde hair tied up in a bun wearing armor over her clothes. The second had long blonde hair tied up in a braid with a sword and silver armor around her dark blue cloak. The final individual wore green clothes and held a bow. She had green hair that later turned to blonde and 2 animal-like ears on top of her head. They all spoke at once. "I ask you, are you my master? Thanks for watching."